3 in the morning, the kind of hour when the world feels hollow and every shadow holds a secret. Lena Torres sits in the darkness of her coffee shop, surrounded by the ghosts of better days. The chairs are stacked on tables like tombstones, and the espresso machine that once hummed with life now stands silent as a confession booth. Her phone glows against her face, displaying a voicemail she's played 17 times. The voice on the other end is polite but firm, the kind of politeness that comes with legal backing and consequences that don't care about your dreams. She knows every word by heart now, each syllable a reminder of the choice she made 6 months ago. The choice that was supposed to save everything. The cafe smells like vanilla and regret. Outside, Portland sleeps peacefully, unaware that inside this small corner of warmth and community, a woman is drowning in the very decision she thought would be her salvation. Some mistakes whisper, others scream. But the worst ones? They take everything you love and leave you sitting alone at 3 in the morning, wondering how trying to save something could destroy it so completely. 2 years earlier, Lena Torres had stood in this same space with paint-stained fingers and a heart full of impossible dreams. The empty storefront on Southeast Division Street wasn't much to look at then, just cracked windows and the lingering smell of the failed restaurant that came before. But Lena saw something different. She saw morning light streaming through clean glass, the gentle hum of conversation, the kind of place where strangers became neighbors over perfectly pulled espresso shots. Her background in corporate finance had taught her to read numbers, to calculate risks, to make decisions with her head instead of her heart. But walking away from that gray cubicle world to open Sunrise Cafe was the first time she'd chosen passion over paycheck, dreams over data. The leap terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. Jesse McCoy appeared in her life like the best kind of accident. He'd wandered in during the cafe's second week, drawn by the smell of fresh pastries and the warmth of Lena's smile. What started as casual conversation over his morning coffee evolved into something deeper. Soon he was arriving before dawn to help with the baking, his gentle hands crafting croissants that paired perfectly with Lena's coffee artistry. Together, they built more than a business. They created a sanctuary where the neighborhood gathered, where first dates bloomed and friendships deepened. The cafe became their shared love letter to community, written in steam and sugar, hope and hard work. Paradise has a way of making you forget that nothing lasts forever. For 18 months, Sunrise Cafe hummed with the kind of energy that made Lena believe she'd cracked the code to happiness. The morning rush brought familiar faces, the afternoon lull filled with laptop workers and book clubs, the evening crowd seeking refuge from the world outside. Every day felt like proof that dreams could pay rent. Then the world shifted, as it has a habit of doing when you least expect it. The neighborhood began to change. The tech company 2 blocks over downsized. The apartment complex across the street went condo, pricing out the young families who used to bring their children for weekend hot chocolate. One by one, the regulars started disappearing, their absence echoing in the empty spaces they left behind. Lena found herself staring at numbers that told an increasingly grim story. Rent that once felt manageable now loomed like a mountain. Supplier invoices stacked higher each month while the cash register sang a quieter song. She began calculating and recalculating, moving money between accounts like a magician trying to make something appear from nothing. Jesse noticed the change first in small ways. How Lena's laughter came less easily. How she'd grown quiet during their evening walks, her mind clearly elsewhere. When he asked about the business, She'd flash that practiced smile and change the subject, telling him everything was fine while her eyes betrayed the weight she carried alone. Sleep became elusive. Lena would lie awake running scenarios, each one darker than the last. The cafe that had been her sanctuary was slowly becoming her prison, and the walls felt like they were closing in with each passing day. Desperation has a way of making the impossible seem reasonable. Lena had been awake for 36 hours straight when the advertisement appeared on her laptop screen, like an answer to a prayer she was too proud to say out loud. Emergency funding for small businesses. Quick approval. Bad credit, okay? The words seemed to glow against the harsh blue light of her screen at 4 a.m. Her finger hovered over the link. Everything logical in her mind screamed warnings about business loans that promised too much too quickly. Her finance background had taught her to read the fine print, to question offers that seemed too good to be true. But logic was a luxury she could no longer afford. The rent notice sat beside her laptop like a ticking clock, and the supplier invoices formed a wall of red ink that grew taller each day. The voice on the phone was smooth as warm honey. "We understand small business owners," the representative assured her. "This isn't like traditional banking. We're here to help when others won't." The merchant cash advance seemed almost too simple. Money within 24 hours, minimal paperwork, no lengthy approval process. Yes, the rates were higher than conventional loans, but this was emergency funding, not a long-term solution. Just enough to cover rent, pay suppliers, buy time to turn things around. Lena told herself it was temporary, a bridge loan to carry her through the rough patch. She had the experience, the dedication, the plan. 6 months, maybe less, and she'd have everything back on track. The high interest rate was just the cost of salvation, and salvation was worth any price. She signed the documents at her kitchen table while Jesse slept in the next room, unaware that his partner was making a decision that would change everything. The pen felt heavier than it should have in her hand, as if it knew the weight of what she was about to commit to, but the cafe needed saving, and she was the only one who could do it. The money arrived like a miracle, but miracles, Lena learned, often come with hidden costs. $25,000 appeared in her business account overnight, enough to pay rent, cover suppliers, and breathe again. For exactly 48 hours, she felt like herself once more. The cafe hummed with renewed energy, fresh pastries filled the display case, and she could meet Jesse's eyes without the weight of impending disaster pressing down on her chest. Then the repayment terms kicked in, and breathing became difficult again. Every morning at 9 sharp, her phone would ping with a notification that made her stomach drop. The automatic withdrawal was already at work, pulling $1,800 from the account that had barely recovered from the day before. Not weekly, not monthly, daily. The merchant cash advance company had structured their trap with mathematical precision, and she was caught in the center of it. The debt spiral tightened with each passing week. What should have been her salvation became a hungry beast that devoured every dollar the cafe earned. She found herself running between the register and her phone, checking balances obsessively, moving money from her personal savings to cover the gaps that grew wider each day. The business that once supported her was now bleeding her dry, drop by drop. Jessie began asking questions she couldn't answer. Why was she so jumpy when the phone rang? Why did she insist on handling all the banking alone? His concerned glances felt like accusations, and her defensive responses only created more distance between them. She started arriving earlier and staying later, partly to work, but mostly to avoid the conversations that might lead to truth. If she had used a cash flow tracker from the beginning, maybe she would have seen the danger signs earlier. Maybe she would have noticed how the daily withdrawals would consume not just her profits, but her dreams. But hindsight is a luxury the desperate can't afford, and foresight becomes clouded when you're drowning. Sleep became a stranger. Lena would lie awake calculating and recalculating, trying to find a combination of numbers that would add up to hope. But math doesn't lie, and the numbers told a story that grew darker with each passing night. She was trapped in a cage of her own making, and the key was buried under an avalanche of mounting debt. The truth has a way of finding light, even in the darkest corners where we try to bury it. Jesse discovered the loan documents on a Tuesday morning, tucked between old receipts in the desk drawer Lena had claimed was broken. He'd only been looking for a pen, something innocent and ordinary, when his fingers found the papers that would shatter everything they'd built together. The numbers on the page told a story she'd been hiding for months. $25,000 borrowed. $1,800 vanishing from their account every single day. Interest rates that made his hands shake as he read them. Default risk notices that painted a picture of impending financial ruin in stark, unforgiving terms. When Lena walked through the cafe door that morning, coffee in hand and that practiced smile on her face, Jesse was sitting at their usual table with the documents spread before him like evidence at a trial. The silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating, until she realized what he'd found. "How long?" His voice was barely above a whisper, but it might as well have been a shout. "How long have you been lying to me?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Lena opened her mouth to explain, to rationalize, to somehow make him understand that everything she'd done was to protect what they'd created together. But the words wouldn't come. How do you explain that love made you lie? That desperation made you dangerous to the very person you were trying to save? "I was handling it," she finally managed, her voice cracking under the weight of months of deception. "I didn't want you to worry. I thought I could fix it before..." "Before what?" Jesse's eyes were bright with unshed tears and something that looked like betrayal. "Before we lost everything? Before I found out my partner has been living a completely different life than the one she's been showing me?" The argument that followed wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet and devastating, the kind of conversation that cuts deeper than screaming ever could. Jesse spoke about trust broken and futures uncertain. Lena tried to explain the impossible mathematics of small business survival, the way pride and panic had clouded her judgment until she couldn't see any other way forward. But explanations felt hollow when the default risk notices were staring them both in the face. The cafe around them, once their sanctuary, now felt like a mausoleum for everything they'd lost without even realizing it was gone. Sometimes losing everything is the only way to find yourself again. 3 weeks after the truth came out, Lena stood in the empty cafe one last time, watching the morning light stream through windows that would soon belong to someone else's dreams. The decision to close hadn't been easy, but it had been necessary. Dignity, she'd learned, was worth more than any business. She'd called the loan company that morning, her voice steady as she explained her situation. Yes, she understood the consequences. Yes, she knew what this meant for her credit. But she also knew that running deeper into debt wouldn't save anything worth saving. The cafe was gone, but she was still here, and that had to count for something. Jesse had helped her pack the last of their personal items in a silence that felt more like healing than hurt. There was no anger left between them, just the quiet sadness of two people who'd loved each other enough to build something beautiful and honest enough to acknowledge when it was time to let go. He'd found an apartment across town, and while they wouldn't be partners anymore, the respect in his eyes when he looked at her felt like a small redemption. "You did the right thing," he'd said as they loaded boxes into his car. It took courage to stop running. The espresso machine that had once been the heart of their operation sat silent in the corner, waiting for the liquidation company to arrive. Lena ran her fingers along its chrome surface one last time, remembering the hundreds of mornings when it had hummed with purpose and possibility. Those memories weren't erased by failure. They were just part of a story that had taken an unexpected turn. She locked the door behind her and walked into the Portland morning, lighter than she'd felt in months. The cafe was closed, the relationship was over, but she was free from the weight of secrets and the burden of pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. Sometimes losing everything teaches you what you actually need to keep. 6 months later, Lena sits in a different cafe, helping another small business owner navigate the treacherous waters of cash flow and emergency decisions. Her new role as a financial consultant feels like coming full circle, using her hardest-earned lessons to guide others away from the same cliffs she once jumped from. The irony isn't lost on her that losing everything taught her more about business than her finance degree ever did. She's learned that desperation is a terrible advisor, that pride can be more expensive than any interest rate, and that the people who love you are often more willing to weather storms than you think they are. She still thinks about Jesse sometimes, wondering if he's found someone who chooses honesty over heroics. Their relationship was a casualty of her choices, but it wasn't a waste. They'd built something real before fear convinced her that secrets were safer than truth. The young woman across from her today reminds Lena of herself 2 years ago, driven, passionate, and dangerously close to making decisions that desperation whispers are necessary. Lena listens to her story without judgment, recognizing the familiar notes of someone trying to save their dream at any cost. "There's always another way," Lena says gently, meaning it more than she's ever meant anything. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is ask for help before you think you need it. Some lessons can only be learned in the ashes of what we thought we couldn't live without. But from those ashes, sometimes wisdom grows.